Hey everyone, this video is going to be on font properties. It's a continuation from our week 8 part 1 demo where we talked about the font families. But now I want to talk more about different properties that are available to us. First, starting with the font size property, because we can specify the size of our text in a couple of different ways. We can use a percent value, we can use a unit of measurement like an M, we can also use an absolute keyword or a relative keyword. Now the unit of measurement for M and the percentage values are used the most common for developers because they work really well with responsive design. And you won't see absolute or relative keywords used very often, but I will talk briefly about them. So let's get us started by talking about percentage, because a percentage is a measurement that sizes an element based on what the element's default or inherited size is. In order for percentage to work, it needs to know what it's in relation to. I'm going to go ahead and comment out the body and H1 selectors in our list just for a few moments, because I'm going to add my own body selector and my own H1 selector. Let's say we want to set our body to 100%. To do this, we use the font size property. Typically, the default size for the body element in most browsers is 16 pixels. So in this example, 100% of the body is equal to 16 pixels. Now let's set the H1 to be 150%. What this means is it's 150% times the inherited value. Now the inherited value is 16 pixels or 100%. That's what it gets from the body element. Because remember, when it comes to text, all of our properties are going to cascade down. So the H1 is going to be 1.5 or 150% times our body. If our body is roughly 16 pixels, that means our H1 should be about the size of 24 pixels. So if I save my changes and refresh my screen, you'll notice that my H1 for Black Goose Bistro is going to be 24 pixels. This is how relative units of measurement are going to work for us. And I'm going to reset my H1's font size so that we can talk about units of measurement, because there are two categories of measurement. We have absolute and we have relative. Now this is not to be confused with absolute keywords and relative keywords. I'll still talk about those in just a minute. When it comes to units of measurement, the relative units are relative measurements based on the size of something else, like the default size of our text or our parent element. We just saw an example of this when we used percentage. Whereas an absolute measurement is a predefined amount, meaning it has a real-world equivalent. Things like millimeters or centimeters or inches. Those units are constant and universal, and they can't change. An inch is an inch is an inch, no matter if it's inside of something else or related to something else. It's always going to be 1 inch. So thinking about the relative side of things, the M unit of measurement is a relative unit of measurement that's basing its size of its element on the inherited or default side, like percentages. It's going to be on the default size. The name is based on the width of the capital letter M. So in my font size for my H1, if I said 1.5 M, then what I'm saying is, if the default size in the body is 100% or 16 pixels, then 1.5 M's for the H1 is going to end up being 24 pixels. Let me refresh that page, and now you can see my H1 has reduced into size to about 24 pixels. Now when we use this relative measurement of M's, notice that there's no space in between the number and the measurement. Now I mentioned before that the M as a unit of measurement and the percentages are used the most commonly because they work best with responsive design. Imagine if your body changes size, everything else is going to flex and change with it. That's what makes it so nice. That's one of the benefits of using those relative measurements. Another relative measurement is the rem or REM. This is a relative unit that bases its size of an element on the root or on the HTML element, not what the inherited size is. This is kind of gaining popularity since it eliminates a lot of the complications of inheritance from the M element, but older browsers aren't quite supporting this just yet. So an example of a unit of measurement that would be considered absolute is the pixel. For the most part, pixels are a unit of measurement that's absolute because they can vary in size depending on the resolution of a screen, but they offer more precise control over the size of the text. Developers do find these a little rigid sometimes, along with some of the other absolute units of measurement, because of what they can do when it comes to responsive web design. So I'll move this H1 underneath my units of measurement as it relates to the M. Now I want to quickly mention what an absolute keyword is and what a relative keyword is. Let's assume that we set all of our paragraphs in our body to be extra large. Now when I save my changes and refresh, you'll notice that the paragraphs are a lot larger than they used to be. Specifically, they're extra large. Now when it comes to this type of a measurement, these keywords are based on what the user's default font size is. Just like the body is 100% or 16 pixels, the default font size in this case would be medium. Now compare that to the relative, where we might say smaller. There are only two relative sized keywords, larger and smaller, and the font's going to be larger or smaller relative to the parent element's font size. So if the parent element is 16 pixels, then smaller will be related to that. Okay, I'm going to remove all of that and reset my previous body in H1 the way that it was before. And I'll refresh my changes. This time I'm going to set my font size property in the body selector to 100%. And I'll make my H1 1.5 times larger than the inherited body style by using that 1.5M. And I'll save my changes. Now I'm going to size my H2 elements to be whatever their default size is. In this case, I'll use 1M. Let's move on to another property. I want to focus next on the font weight property, because to change the weight of text, we can use keywords like normal, bold, bolder, lighter, and we can also use numeric values between 100 and 900. Typically, the only value we will use is bold. So let's change all of the menu items to bold using the font weight property. Notice how all of my description terms are in bold? Well, I could accomplish that same thing if I were to use a numeric property. What if I changed bold to the number 700? So if you're wondering about the bold or the strong elements in HTML and why we're using font weight to make text bold instead of using those other two elements, well, that's because you should really avoid using the bold element because it's already a style. When you make text bold with a bold element, you're really telling the browser to make it bold right from the HTML. And strong will also make text appear bold, but it's really semantic. Because you're not just making the text bold with strong, you're calling special attention to it. But when we use the font weight property, we can make things lighter or bolder, and that's based on its surrounding text. So we're not changing the meaning of the HTML, we're only changing the visual properties of the actual content. This allows us to use different variations. So adding extra emphasis to content, you can use bold or strong if you want to modify your HTML for a specific reason. But if you just want to change the visual appearance, it's best to use the font weight property. Let's move on to the next one. I want to talk now about the font style property. Now, font style is a way to make text look italic or oblique. And italic fonts are usually in a separate typeface design with curved letters, where oblique takes the normal text and then slants it a little bit. It may appear like in some browsers that there's no difference whatsoever. So in our preview, each one of our strong tags that's in our HTML, we're going to also make it italic. So pay attention to the items new item and very spicy. I'm going to target the strong selector, and I'm going to give it a font style of italic. And I'll save my changes. So while I'm still calling very special attention using HTML to those elements, I'm also styling it so that it appears as if it's an italic font. We also have what's called the font variant property. And the font variant can change some fonts to be all in small capitals. Let's take a look at our paragraph element. I'll use the font variant small caps. And I'll save my changes. Now there's a lot of properties that we can use for fonts. So the creators of CSS made it super easy with a handy shortcut, so we can take all of those different styles and make one rule to apply them. We can list all of the values, such as the font's style, weight, variant, the size and line height, and the font family, all at once. But we need to do it in a very specific order. Our property is going to be the font, and our values in order are going to be style, weight, variant, size and line height, and font family. So for example, let's target our H1. We're going to use that font property, And we're going to make it oblique, bold, with small caps. We'll set our size to 1.5 em and our line height to be 1.8 em, and we'll pick a sans serif font family. And I'll save my changes. And remember, it needs to be in that exact order. That's a lot to remember as far as what goes in what order. So at our bare minimum, we could just say the font size and the font family. I think out of all of that, I rather enjoyed the H1 when it had all of our different properties in it. So I'm going to copy it and replace our existing H1 selector with this. I'll comment out this last one, and I'll save my changes. So that's just a small look at a bunch of different types of properties that we have for our fonts. Again, we have units of measurement for the font size, we have font weight, font style, font variant, and then we had that font shortcut. So I think I'm going to stop right there, but if you have any questions on this content, please don't hesitate to ask.